Stories, Philippines, podcast.
Disclaimer: the narratives and events presented in this program are for entertainment and informational purposes. This episode delves into dark themes and unsettling concepts that may not be suitable for all listeners. We encourage you to proceed with care and consider your personal comfort level before continuing. The air in the booth is thick. It's not just the dust of decades or the heavy scent of old wood and stale incense. It's something else, a kind of a spiritual exhaust. You kneel on the worn cushion. The kneeler knows the weight of every sin confessed in this small, silent box. A thin lattice screen separates you from the priest on the other side, a barrier of anonymity, a shield against shame. But are you truly alone in the dark? Can a place of ultimate truth and forgiveness also become a prison for the deepest, darkest secrets? What happens to a sin that is spoken, heard, and yet remains unforgiven? Does it evaporate into the ether, or does it cling to the walls, the wood grain, the very fabric of the cloth, gathering weight and forming a residue of despair? Imagine a small, enclosed space designed for whispered communication, a conduit for the soul's greatest burdens. If objects can hold memory, if stone and timber can absorb the energy of intense human emotion, then what must a confessional booth contain? It has absorbed the terror of the murderer, the anguish of the unfaithful, the crushing shame of the thief. It has heard the truth told in the quietest voice, the truth the world will never know. It is a container of pure, concentrated sin. And sometimes what has been contained finds a way to leak out. Sometimes what was meant to be forgiven stays behind, trapped in the cedar walls. Sometimes the confessor leaves, but the confession remains. I am Paul, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast. The story of the haunted confessional booth is not just a Filipino phenomenon. It is a universal echo found in the shadowed corners of churches around the world. But here in the Philippines, with its deep roots in Spanish-era Catholicism and its even deeper attachment to ancient animist beliefs, the fear takes on a unique texture. The Catholic Church became the central pillar of life during the over 300 years of Spanish rule, which began in the late 1500s. Every town, from the sprawling capital of Manila to the remotest coastal village, was anchored by a massive stone church. These churches were not just places of worship, they were the centers of political, economic, and social life. They were built to last, heavy stone fortresses intended to symbolize the permanence of the new faith. This historical context is crucial. These old structures, many of them predating the 1900s, were not just built with stone and mortar. They were built on sites that sometimes had ancient significance to the indigenous people, places where rituals had been performed, where spirits of the land were already believed to reside. When the new faith arrived, it did not entirely replace the old beliefs. Layered upon them. The Spanish friars fought tirelessly against the local spirits, the anidos na diwatas, but the people often found ways to merge them, creating a folk Catholicism where the saints and the spirits coexisted. The church was sacred ground, yes, but it was also a place where ancient energies met the rigid dogmatic power of a European religion, a powerful collision point. The confessional booth itself emerged as a standard fixture in churches following the Council of Trent in the 1500s. Before then, confession was often a more public affair, a source of great embarrassment. The enclosed booth was a revolutionary invention, offering privacy and encouraging people to seek the sacrament more regularly. It was a tool of immense spiritual power, a private space where the soul was laid bare. This newfound privacy, however, also became a breeding ground for rumors and dark histories. Consider the European context. In places like Italy and Spain, Where the Inquisition once held sway during the 1600s, the confessional was sometimes a tool of state power. Priests were occasionally pressured to report on seditious speech or heresies heard within the booth. Though not as prevalent in the Philippines, the weight of that history of surveillance and the absolute unquestioned authority of the priest still hung in the air. The confessional was not just a place for forgiveness, it was a place of absolute, sometimes terrifying power imbalance. Let's travel to the Visayas region of the Philippines, to a city whose name we will not mention to protect the location. It is a city known for its beautiful colonial-era churches. The year is 1985. Celeste Joy Abelanosa was 19. She was a quiet, diligent student attending a private university. She had a kind of nervous energy, often fidgeting with the silver crucifix she wore around her neck. Her best friend, Amira Jane Lim, was more outgoing, but in the close-knit community of their university, they were inseparable. Celeste was devout, almost obsessively so, driven by a deep-seated fear of eternal punishment. The main church in their city was a magnificent example of earthquake Baroque architecture. Its walls were thick, its interior dark, even at midday, lit primarily by the flickering light of countless devotional candles. The confessional booths, tucked away in the deepest recesses of the side aisles, were made of dark, heavy nara wood, polished smooth by centuries of supplicant hands. Celeste had been battling a secret for months, a secret that was floated to her young and deeply religious mind, felt like an insurmountable mountain of sin. The weight of it was crushing her. It was something minor by the standards of the outside world, a transgression of a strict family rule, but the shame was immense. One cool afternoon, after her classes, Celeste went to the church. She saw the light on in the third confessional booth, the one closest to the altar of St. Jude. The priest on the other side was Father Raphael, a gentle older man known for his kindness. Celeste knelt. Her knees hit the hard wood. The smell of the ancient wood was intense. She pulled the sliding wooden panel open. It made a dry scraping sound that seemed deafening in the silence. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," she began, her voice barely a whisper. As she spoke, she noticed something odd. The air in the booth was growing cold, intensely cold, despite the tropical heat outside. Her breath, she realized with a strange sense of confusion, was misting. Then she heard it. It wasn't Father Raphael's calming, low voice. It was a faint, high-pitched scratching sound coming from the wood right next to her ear. A sound like fingernails desperately dragging across the other side of the screen, or perhaps inside the hollow of the wood. Celeste paused, her confession caught in her throat. "Yes, my child?" continued the priest prompted, his voice muffled. "Father," Celeste whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs, "is someone else in here?" "No, my child, only us," the priest replied patiently. As she prepared to continue, the scratching intensified. It was frantic now, coupled with a noise that sounded like a labored, wet breathing, and then a whisper. Not from the priest's side, but right next to her head, on her side of the booth. It was a man's voice, gravelly and full of profound, terrible suffering. It said only one word: unforgiven. The sound and the raw despair in the voice paralyzed Celeste. She didn't scream. She simply scrambled backward, falling out of the booth and onto the stone floor. When she looked up, the grating of the confessional was shimmering, just for a moment, as if a heat haze had warped the air in the dark box. She ran. Celeste's experience is a classic encounter, one that resonates deeply with Filipino cultural beliefs. The concept of a trapped spirit or a kaluluwa that cannot move on is central to our folklore. In pre-colonial beliefs, the spirits of the dead needed proper rites to transition to the afterlife. If these rites were skipped, or if a person died with immense guilt or a terrible secret, their kaluluwa would remain tethered to the earthly plane. In the Christian context, this translates easily into the concept of purgatory, or a soul lost due to mortal sin. The ghost of the confessional fits this mold perfectly. It is a spirit burdened by an unreleased or unforgiven sin, unable to leave the physical space where the burden was acknowledged. The spirit haunts the booth because the booth represents the last opportunity for absolution it was denied. Or perhaps the place where it committed an act so heinous that even the sacrament of confession could not cleanse the stain immediately. This belief has global parallels. In medieval European monasteries, there are stories of monks who died without completing their penance, their spirits doomed to perform their duties endlessly. The famous screaming skulls of England, believed to hold the spirits of murdered or unforgiven individuals, are another example of an object absorbing and radiating the residual energy of human pain. The idea is that powerful emotion imprints on the environment. Years passed, Celeste finished her schooling and moved away. But the story of the ghostly whisper in the confessional became a hushed legend among the local college students. The third booth was rarely used. People instinctively avoided it. One of the people who heard the story was a young man named Danilo Flores, an amateur paranormal investigator in his early 20s. He ran a small online group dedicated to documenting strange phenomena. His approach was a blend of technology and cultural sensitivity. He wasn't out to debunk the stories, but to document the energy. Danilo was skeptical of pure ghost stories, but believed intensely in residual haunting. The idea that a powerful, repetitive event or emotion could be recorded by the stone and wood of an old building. He secured permission from the local church administration under the pretext of documenting the historical architecture to spend a few nights inside the church in the late 1990s. On his third night, Danilo set up his equipment near the third confessional. He used a digital voice recorder and an electromagnetic field detector. He sat on a folding chair in the aisle, the darkness so complete it felt almost physical. It was just past midnight. The only sound was the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional flutter of a bat. The EMF meter, which normally read at a flat 0 in the church's quiet interior, suddenly spiked, shooting up to a high reading of over 7 milligauss. The spike was momentary, lasting only about 5 seconds, but it was enough to make Danielo's blood run cold. Immediately after the spike, he heard a sound. It was distinct, a low, rhythmic dragging noise coming from inside the confessional. It was not a door opening or closing, it was a kind of shuffling, like someone struggling to kneel or stand within the cramped space. Danilo, though terrified, flipped on his voice recorder and held it toward the booth. "Is there someone in there?" he whispered. The shuffling stopped, the silence returned, heavy and oppressive. The EMF meter had dropped back to 0. Danilo waited for 10 minutes. Then he slowly got up, flashlight in hand, and approached the booth. He opened the door carefully. The interior was empty. He shone the light on the kneeler. It was dusty, undisturbed. But on the small wooden shelf where the priest would place his book of prayer and a small crucifix, Danilo saw something that wasn't there before. A faint, almost invisible, moist smear on the wood. It was small, a dark spot that quickly evaporated in the flashlight's beam. The next morning, Danilo listened to his recording. After his whispered question, "Is there someone in there?" there was a long silence. Then, a sound that made his ears ring. It was a single, shattering sob. The sound of a man weeping with unimaginable force. It was choked, guttural, and ended abruptly, as if the person had been instantly silenced. Danilo's experience supports the scientific concept of a stone tape theory. This theory suggests that certain materials, particularly quartz-rich stone, can act as a recording device for emotional energy. In the case of the confessional, the very purpose of the space, to concentrate and release intense guilt, shame, and despair, may have charged the wood and stone, creating a psychic echo that plays back under the right energetic condition. Now, let's consider the psychological perspective. The confessional is a powerful psychological tool. It is a space designed for catharsis, the release of deeply suppressed emotional and mental anguish. For many, the act of vocalizing a secret reduces its power. However, for some, the experience can be deeply traumatic. Imagine a priest who is overwhelmed by the sheer volume of human darkness he hears. In theological terms, a priest is forbidden from ever revealing what he hears in the confessional, a vow known as the seal of confession. This places an enormous psychological burden on the clergy. They become silent repositories of the community's darkest secrets. There are legends here in the Philippines of priests who went mad from the weight of this spiritual load. One story, which circulated during the late 1800s, tells of a priest named Father Eduardo. He was an incredibly strict disciplinarian. One day, a man confessed to a crime so monstrous, the torture and murder of a defenseless person, that Father Eduardo, bound by his vow, could not report him to the authorities. the sheer overwhelming evil of the confession broke something inside the priest. He was found the next morning in the confessional, dead. He had suffocated himself, according to the official report, but local whispers said he had been crushed by the weight of the man's sin. His ghost is said to occasionally move the screen of the confessional, as if silently beckoning for one last, impossible confession of his own. The modern psychologist would view the ghostly manifestation not necessarily as an actual spirit, but as an externalized manifestation of the shared subconscious guilt of the community. The intense, claustrophobic atmosphere of the booth, combined with the extreme psychological pressure of revealing one's deepest shame, creates a kind of collective anxiety that can manifest as auditory or visual hallucinations. In the theological context, the haunting of a confessional raises profound questions about the nature of sin and forgiveness. If the sacrament is truly effective, if the priest's absolution carries the power of God, then the sin should be erased and the soul freed. A haunting suggests a failure in this process. Perhaps the ghost is not the soul of the confessor, but the soul of the confession itself, a form of spiritual matter that was not fully dissolved by the grace of God due to a lack of true contrition on the part of the supplicant. The confessor says the words, but his heart is not in it. The sin is spoken, the absolution is given, but the moral residue, the black stain on the soul, remains, and it attaches itself to the physical place of the lie. Another theological view is that the haunting is a demonic deception, a malevolent force that has no place in the sacred space of the confessional. It would lurk there, tempting the faithful to believe the place of forgiveness is corrupted, thereby driving them away from the sacrament and the saving grace of the church. The word unforgiven, heard by Celeste, could be a lie, designed to instill despair and doubt in the power of God's mercy. The story of the third confessional resurfaced in the early 2010s. A group of engineering students from Manila, vacationing in the area, decided to test the legend. One of them, Julian Kenneth Ivireo, the young man who was known for his love of a challenge, volunteered to spend the night in the church. This time, the event was not a subtle whisper. Julian hid in the church after the evening mass. He found a place behind a velvet curtain near a large statue of the Virgin Mary. Once the doors were locked and the lights extinguished, he moved quickly to the third confessional. He didn't enter it, but sat cross-legged directly in front of the door, his camera on a tripod, recording. He wanted proof. He was there for about an hour. He was checking his phone for the time when a sound from the confessional made him freeze. It was the sound of a very heavy object being dragged across the floor inside the booth. Not a wooden chair, but something heavier, something metallic. Then, the wooden panel on the priest's side of the booth, the one that seals the opening between the priest and the penitent, began to slowly, agonizingly slide open. No one was there. The sound continued. Now it was a heavy thud, like a body falling to the floor. Then, a low, rasping moan. Julian was gripping the flashlight so tightly his knuckles were white. He was breathing through his mouth. He felt the intense, suffocating cold. The smell of dust and old wood was suddenly overpowered by another scent, the acrid, metallic smell of blood. The sound of the dragging came again, but this time it was louder, seeming to come from the floor itself. It felt as if something was being pulled along the stone pavement from beneath the booth, and whatever it was huge. Julien could not move. The terror was absolute. He felt like his soul was being pulled out through his skin. Then, from the darkness behind him, from the vast emptiness of the main aisle, a low, authoritative voice cut through the silence. It was a clear, masculine voice, completely devoid of emotion. "Get out!" The sound was not directed at Julien. It felt like a command given to the presence in the confessional. Immediately, the coldness vanished, the smell of blood disappeared, the dragging and the groaning stopped as abruptly as if a switch had been flipped. The light on the camera's digital screen seemed suddenly bright. Julien didn't look behind him, he didn't check the confessional, he simply got up, grabbed his tripod and camera, and ran to the main doors. He struggled with the complex, heavy iron lock. Finally, he managed to open it, slipping out and pulling the door shut behind him with a thunderous clang. He didn't stop running until he reached the bright lights of a 24-hour fast food restaurant. Julien's encounter introduces a new element, the spiritual protector. In the context of a Catholic church, this could be the spirit of a departed saint, a guardian angel assigned to the church, or perhaps the spirit of a former priest of immense piety like the gentle Father Raphael, whose spiritual strength was so great it remained attached to the place of his ministry. This figure represents the opposite pole of the haunting, the spiritual force of goodness and protection. The church, after all, is a house of God, a place where the forces of light and darkness are in constant struggle. Think about the geography again. A large stone church in a tropical country. The air is humid, the stone is porous, the wood breathes, the sounds of the city are muffled by the thick walls. It is a perfect setting for auditory illusions. But the repeated sensory details, the intense cold, the smell of blood, the deep despair in the voice suggest something more than mere illusion. These are classic paranormal signatures. The profound sense of suffering indicates a presence that is deeply miserable, caught between worlds. Julian eventually uploaded his footage. The camera, of course, showed only darkness, with the date and timestamp proving he was there. But the audio recording was chilling. The moment the dragging started, the sound pressure level on the microphone peaked. The guttural moan was clearly audible. And then, the abrupt, commanding voice saying, "Get out." This voice was examined by forensic audio experts. Their conclusion was fascinating. The voice, though clearly a man's, had an unusual vocal quality. It contained no sibilants, no ha sounds. The word "get out" was pronounced with a strange, flat resonance. Some theological experts who heard the recording suggested it was the voice of a non-human entity, perhaps a messenger of the spiritual realm. The story of the ghost of the Confessional is a powerful reminder that our places of spiritual solace are not immune to the darkness. They are in fact often the target. Do you have a story from a place of worship? A strange whisper in the silence of a chapel, or a chilling experience in a quiet corner of a historic church? The darkness is everywhere, even where we least expect it. Please submit your stories to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. We are always listening. So, what are we to make of the third confessional? Is it the prison of a murdered priest? A man who perished from the psychological weight of a terrible secret? His spiritual self forever locked in the booth, reenacting his silent, fatal judgment? Or is it the restless soul of an unforgiven sinner, one who died immediately after his confession? His last thought one of utter despair, his soul now unable to receive the grace of absolution? Perhaps it is neither. Perhaps it is a kind of spiritual gravity well, a spot in the old church where the sheer density of human misery, the countless whispered evils, the desperate tears, the crushing shame has created a permanent vortex of negative energy, a place where the lines between the sacred and the profane have blurred. The confessional booth, a construction meant to facilitate the release of sin, has instead become a magnet, a container, a kind of spiritual septic tank for the dark side of the human soul. The church remains. The wood of the confessional booth stands firm. The silence of that corner of the aisle still beckons to those seeking peace. But the stories linger, whispering in the shadows, reminding us that every sacred place has its secret, and every act of profound revelation comes with a terrible price. The stories in our podcasts are brought to life by the generous support of our listeners. You can find show notes for this episode, which include some of the historical and cultural references we discussed, as well as support options in the description of this episode. Your support helps us continue to unearth the hidden narratives of the Philippines. If you enjoyed the deeper dive into the folklore and history that we provide, consider this an invitation to access exclusive content on Patreon. We have bonus episodes and extended discussions about the darker side of history and Filipino myth. And make sure you follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. We post a lot of fascinating information about the aswang and other mythological creatures that tie into our historical episodes. What happens to a spiritual burden when it is too heavy to be lifted even by forgiveness? Does it remain pressed into the very matter of the world, waiting for a sensitive ear to hear its eternal, silent scream? Join us next time as we explore another hidden corner of the Philippines where history and the supernatural converge. Thank you for listening to Stories Philippines podcast. If you were captivated by this tale, please like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast. Your support is our lifeblood. And remember, you can support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes. Until the next shadow falls, may your confessions be truthful and your soul find rest.